Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Natural World Weekly, the show where we learn about the wonder of our natural world through science and animals. My name is Avery. I'm a biochemistry student here at UIC, and every week on this show, I'll walk you through a bizarre animal and an interesting natural phenomenon, and you do not need to be a scientist or science person to understand this podcast. I hope you all enjoy this week's episode. This week is actually our Women's History Month themed episode, even if the topics seem unrelated at first. We'll be talking about a frog species that's roughly the size of a 3-year-old toddler, and our science segment will explain the science of pregnancy tests and their history with today's frog species. For today's animal segment, which again, I promise it is related to Women's History Month, we will be discussing the largest frog ever recorded by a pretty wide margin, the Goliath frog. They are an average of 13 inches long and weigh 7 pounds, and both the females and the males grow this big. I've seen pictures online of people trying to hold them, and people can't even hold them with one hand because they're so massive. Their native range is pretty small. They really only exist in Equatorial Guinea and Cameroon in their rainforest, and those countries are in West Africa. They live overall, honestly, a pretty gnarly life during their mating seasons, which is the dry season, so like July, August. The males will brutally brawl each other in what could only be described as like turf wars. They make nests for their eggs in rivers, and so they fight off each other for prime real estate space to make their nests, with brawls routinely ending in fatalities. The females, however, also have to be strong and intimidating, since they are actually in charge of protecting the eggs from predators once they're laid, and there are many predators in their rainforest environment. Despite being ginormous and very tough animals, they are actually endangered and a pretty vulnerable species. Our first endangered species on the show. You can see how these giant sized beasts would intrigue humans. I mean, it intrigues me. But this is why they are actually a very hot commodity for the pet trade and the illegal exotic pet trade. In fact, very sadly, I learned by researching for this episode that if you search Goliath frog on Google, the first recommended search is, unfortunately, Goliath frog for sale. They sell for hundreds and hundreds of dollars per frog, especially higher now considering they've been put under legal controls due to the rapidly dwindling population. And since it's, a black market and controlled, they're more expensive. I honestly don't understand the logic or thought process behind people thinking they can properly take care of a Goliath beast frog and say that it's their pet. It's not a pet. That behavior, to me, it kind of screams like Florida man for some reason, but I don't know. In addition to people wanting a giant ass frog as a pet for some reason, they also do attract hunting from both locals and traveling poacher trophy hunters alike. Honestly, I do understand from a local perspective. Imagine you are malnourished and need food, and there's a frog the size of a small child in your backyard. I feel like most people would try to hunt those to feed their family. It has been made illegal to hunt them now since they're endangered, but illegal poaching is still prevalent. However, they're not as easy of a catch as you might think. And this is my favorite fact about our animal today. They have an astonishing max jump height of 3 meters, or just under 10 feet for my freedom uniters out there. I don't have the bruh sound effect today, so unfortunately I can't do that. But for reference, the Olympic men's high jump record is 8 feet. So they jump 2 feet higher than the highest jump ever recorded by a human. Isn't that insane? No, I do understand that the poachers are pretty desperate for food and money, but man, seeing a 7-pound frog jump at 10 feet in the air would be more than enough to scare me off for good and choose a different animal. That is just insane to think about. That is honestly pretty much all there is for the Goliath frog. I know that was shorter, but there isn't a ton of, information about them just because they're a pretty niche species, not super prevalent. But I did love talking about them. They're honestly, after this, they're probably near the top of my animals to see in the wild bucket list. I'd love to see them in their native range especially during mating season in their brawl sessions. I'd love to witness that. And I'd also love to witness their crazy jump height. I think that would be very, very cool. But now we are going to move on to our longer science segment where I will finally make the link of frogs, especially African frogs, to Women's History Month. For today's science segment, we'll be talking about how at-home urine pregnancy tests work, as well as the predecessor to the modern urine pregnancy test, African frogs. What about pee gives away that you're pregnant? It seems completely unrelated to a fetus. I mean, the fetus isn't living in your bladder or your pee hole. Why does your urine say that you're pregnant? Well, there's a hormone called human chorionic gonadotropin, but people just say HCG because that's easier. But not for me, apparently. And it's given off by early embryos about 6 to 7 days after the fertilized egg implants into the uterus. A lot of it leaves the uterus, however, and goes to your kidneys, where a smaller section of it, called beta HCG, is put into the urine, and thus your pee has this pregnancy signal. HCG critically is not produced or found by really anything outside of fetus tissue, so this is a pretty reliable signal for pregnancy. Most pregnancy tests, in fact, whether the at-home stick that you pee on or a blood test, are testing for this HCG hormone. Quick aside here, what is a hormone? A hormone is just a chemical that's made in your body, and it signals stuff. Like, for example, the hunger hormone. It says to your body, I'm hungry, and the fullness hormone says, I'm full. This chemical signal, the hormone, it triggers a bunch of processes in your body. Like the hunger hormone makes your stomach grumble and your body feel like the hunger feeling. HCG is one of these signals, and it tells your body, we got a baby, we're pregnant, we should allocate our resources differently to support the fetus. And specifically, HCG has the body thicken up the uterine lining to prop up the baby. It also signals on a pregnancy test that you're pregnant, too. But how do these strips actually work? How does it take pee and see the hormone and say, oh yeah, the hormone is in here? When you pee onto a pregnancy test, the pee goes in and lands on what they call a sample pad. It's just where the sample, i.e. your piss, collects as you keep peeing on it. Then it slowly moves down the strip where a mix of two chemicals is awaiting. One of them is just like a colored or fluorescent particle that makes the sample actually show up on the strip. I mean, think about it, pee is pretty clear. So needs that. And the other is an antibody, which is just something that attacks bacteria or other foreign agents. It's an antibody, and it traps the HCG and it keeps it from moving further. Then if there is HCG, it'll get attacked by this antibody, and that plus the dye, whatever there is, it'll all clump together and it'll stop and, coalesce together into a line, which is what gets you the two lines that mean a positive pregnancy test. There's also the new digital tests that don't have the two lines, but those just read it and then display on a screen pregnant or not pregnant. So there's not really, it still does the clumping, it just doesn't show you. The whole point of that is really just, it looks more high-tech and cool if there's a screen. That's really all there is. But because of how the two-line traditional pregnancy test works, how you need HCG to clump together like this for it to work, you can imagine that false positives are exceptionally rare, but false negatives can and do happen. For example, if you drink a ton of water and your pee is super dilute, or if you're too early on in the pregnancy for the HCG to fully kick in, you can reasonably expect a false negative, which is why it's always, always, always super important to take multiple tests or get a blood test from a doctor to be completely sure. Also know that if you ever get a positive urine test, you can be pretty darn sure you're pregnant because you definitely have HCG in your pee. Now, if you remember me saying just a few minutes ago that African frogs were used as a predecessor to modern pregnancy tests, like, for example, the Goliath frog that we talked about, you might be curious as to how, that could possibly work. And surely it doesn't work the same way as a urine test. Unfortunately, it does work pretty similarly. The women, they wouldn't pee on the frogs, to be clear, but honestly, it's even worse than that. Scientists would take a urine sample from the woman and inject it into the frogs' backs. Then HCG, the wonderful hormone we just talked about, it actually triggers female frogs to lay eggs if injected into their body. Even across vastly different species, we share a common pregnancy-related hormone, which I do think is quite beautiful. But anyways, the test was just watching the frogs to see if they laid eggs. Although we can say now that is pretty gnarly and a bit cruel, I do think it was an interesting, intermediate in the process of developing pregnancy tests. At that point, to develop this, unfortunately, I would call a frog holocaust, we knew about HCG. We knew what it was, and we knew beta HCG was present in pregnant urine, and we knew that it also works in other species like frogs, but we didn't know how to develop a test to actually detect it on its own. I think it speaks to the human spirit that we knew all this stuff, but we just didn't know yet how to make a test. So we did this really, ingenious, weird solution for quite a few decades. I think it's just an interesting step in the scientific history process. Now, as you can probably imagine, mass exodus and trafficking of African frogs all across the world had some not great environmental impacts. Also, obviously, as well as the humanitarian concerns of piercing frogs every day. So I am definitely really, really grateful for the urine strip test. It and many other inventions like it, like birth control, safe medical abortions, and period products have done so much for first world women and our freedom. It's truly amazing to me how science can impact human behavior and social dynamics. For Women's History Month, I would like to express my gratitude for these inventions that give us freedom and choice, as well as acknowledge that there are still millions of women who don't have easy access to reproductive health care or just health care at all. We have a really, really long way to go to invest in third world healthcare systems, but I wanted to close off this episode with sharing some good news about it. Last month, the Maternal Center of Excellence in Sierra Leone opened, a cutting-edge facility for reproductive pregnancy and birth care. Sierra Leone previously had the highest maternal mortality rate in the world for a long time. In 2019, the lifetime risk for a woman to die in childbirth was 1 in 20. For reference, it's 1 in 4,000 in the US. However, increased funding towards building their healthcare system has significantly lessened that risk for Sierra Leoneans, and it's only projected to grow with the Center of Excellence's new operations. It just goes to show that we can reduce crises that seem impossible, and we can save human life if we just invest in them. Thank you all so much for watching our Women's History Month episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Shout out to all the women out there. If I had an air horn now, I would put that, but unfortunately our soundboard is not working. I do really enjoy doing themed episodes with the time they're released, so please let me know if you'd want any themes featured. I hope to see you all next week. Reminder that all sources will be linked in the description, and until next week, remember to stay kind and curious.